Gormagat Kirloch, and welcome back to the Senate, Minister, and thank you for bringing this legislation, and I do hope that there will be unanimous support for these amendments that you're bringing forward. The proposal that we are considering today is to extend the emergency protection periods for renters who have been negatively impacted by COVID. And Minister, I commend you and the government for the supports you have provided. And while I accept that only 1% of renters have fallen into arrears over this period, it is still 1%, and it's 1% of, I suppose there's almost 1 million people living in rented accommodation now in terms of our population. So it's really important that the state and the government does provide those protections. This is the 4th time that you have extended the protections, and while none of us want to think that by next January we will be still struggling with COVID restrictions, it is a very important measure that the extension is being put there to that long date, so that people and those who are negatively impacted will have the comfort and security of knowing that they are protected from rent increases and from evictions. I also want to commend you, Minister, and the government for the permanent changes that you're making in terms of restricting the amount of deposit and rent that can be required by way of an upfront payment. You know the housing crisis that we're all working hard to tackle and to defeat. But in the meantime, there have been, thankfully, it's more isolated, it's not a general problem, but there have been isolated incidents where there have been unscrupulous activities taking place. And it is really welcome that the restrictions are being made here permanently, that the amount that can be paid up front can be limited to 2 months. And additionally, and I also want to commend the Union of Students of Ireland for their campaign and others, that you are providing as well the facility for a 28-day notice on student accommodation. That's a practical and important measure. For parents and students, access to education is a life-changing event and empowering, but accommodation is hugely expensive, and it is really an important facility that they would have the flexibility to terminate within 28 days. I want to also just take this moment to thank and commend everybody who has worked to support renters during the pandemic. Staff in our local authorities, staff in Threshold, the Residential Tenancies Board, MABs, the Intrio offices right around the country, and the Citizens Information Services, and indeed all of our local authority members and public representatives. We're all battling in this together, but I think it is really important that renters have been supported. I want to welcome also your recent announcement, Minister, for 75 million of funding for student accommodation, for the state to lead in the provision of student accommodation. I think that is really welcome, and you know, you've heard me talk about this many times. We do need the state to support proper purpose-built student accommodation at our university and third level campuses, so the 75 million is very welcome development, and that of course comes on top of your historic 3.3 billion housing budget, the biggest in the history of the state, and the groundbreaking legislation that you're bringing forward in terms of the affordable cost rental. And I know, Minister, that you understand, and that's why you're bringing forward the affordable cost rental, the precarious nature of our rental. It has been a market because it has largely all been privately delivered rental accommodation. That's how the historic system has been here, apart from the state's provision of social housing. So the introduction of the affordable cost rental model has the potential to change the residential rental landscape. And Minister, I commend you and the government for being ambitious with that affordable cost rental model. I also want to thank you, and you mentioned it here, the balancing of rights between the landlord and the tenants, for the government's support to the motion that was unanimously supported by this House for a right to housing, in an amendment to Oireachtas Éireann to insert the right to housing. That actually will ensure that going forward we can have a real balancing, not only in our constitution of the private property rights, but also the essential right to secure affordable accommodation and housing. When we talk about the residential market and we talk about the 365 residential tenancies, I suppose, as I said, it's a privately controlled market. There's some issues I'd like you to consider, Minister, as you prepare your Housing for All plan, or you finalise your Housing for All plan, and as the Government reviews the National Development Plan. I've mentioned the affordable cost rental. It is game-changing. It can deliver secure, affordable rental accommodation into the future, and the LDA is being set up on a statutory basis to deliver 150,000 homes over the next 20 years. I know that the Government has committed to 50,000 social homes. I would like the same ambitions to be reflected in the Housing for All when it comes to affordable housing. It's really important that we ensure that our rental market is affordable, it's sustainable, people have secure tenures on an indefinite period. I also think, Minister, and I commend you again for the work you've done to tackle the vacancy in local authority and state-owned properties. The monies that you provided and that were oversubscribed by the local authorities are turning vacant, boarded up City Council flats in my own constituency in Dublin Central. You awarded another, and thank you, Minister, 5 million only yesterday. It'll be 100 extra flats put back into use in Matt Talbot Court, Botanic Avenue, Constitution Hill and Dorset Street. Really welcome, really pragmatic use of existing built infrastructure that's been lying vacant shamelessly, absolutely negligently. But Minister, I commend you for actually providing the funding to ensure they can be reopened. And at the same time, your commitment to the regeneration projects in these inner city complexes that will have real ambition. And I suppose it's in that context, Minister, and in the context of the National Development Plan and the Housing for All plan, that I want you to push the Government to be really ambitious. The economic circumstances are right for the Government to be ambitious, to be radical. The suspension of the European Stability Pact constraints, they are conducive to it. The environment is economically conducive to the Government to borrow to invest in sustainable social infrastructure. That's what housing is, social and affordable housing, which can deliver for generations to come. I also want you to, Minister, when finalising those plans, to look at, and I know you're already considering this, the build-to-rent model, the standards in build-to-rent, and we understand why the build-to-rent model is there historically, but we need to look at that into the future. But most importantly, I suppose, the leases of indefinite tenure, the rent pressure zones, they have to be tackled. We need policies that actually will ensure sustainable, affordable and secure rental tenures into the future. And finally, Minister, I'm going to make a plea to you again on the SHD process. I know you have committed and the Government has committed not to extend the SHDs after they expire. That's a really welcome, pragmatic decision. It actually speaks to the fact that the SHDs failed. They have failed to deliver an increase in housing, and at the same time they've alienated communities from what should be a democratic process. I would ask, Minister, that you'd consider maybe, and I don't know if you can comment on this today, but if you can consider asking An Bord Pleanála to stop engaging in consultations on those SHDs, because the reality of it is that 90% of them, the vast majority of them, are being appealed for judicial review. 90% of those have failed in the courts. And on top of that, it is not delivering housing, it's delaying the process. But worse still, it's costing the state an awful lot in terms of having to fund An Bord Pleanála to engage in the judicial review process. Gur míle mágad.